Nigeria and Brazil share decades of trade and diplomatic ties, but many past memoranda of understanding have ended up as unfulfilled promises. While President Tinubu's recent agreement in Brazil have sparked optimism, history shows that without follow-through and follow-ups, MoUs remain just good intentions. And with bilateral trade potential conservatively valued at $10 billion annually, the key question is whether these latest agreements will mark a turning point or simply a repeat of old patterns. Collins Nweke, a global affairs analyst, joins me to discuss this. Collins, thank you so much for coming around on the show.
Thank you, Lincoln, for having me.
You're welcome. Now, MOUs are not binding contracts, but symbolic promises. But as it concerns Nigeria in time past, why do they fail to materialize after so much hype?
They have failed to materialize, Lincoln, because all of us, and that includes the media, have not done their part. Not doing their part, for instance, starting with the media, means that you guys have failed to interrogate these MOUs, Memorandum of Understanding. In this case, in the case of Brazil, we're talking of Memoranda of Understanding because in this specific trip, there were four, specific ones signed. The media is in a position to take government to task, explain to the Nigerian public what the content of these memoranda of understanding are, and actually push government to ask the uncomfortable questions in terms of, yes, you have signed this memorandum of understanding, but memorandum of understanding are expressions of good intentions. They do not feed the millions of hungry people in Nigeria, neither do they grow the Nigerian economy if they are not implemented. The media fail to do that. And then take the government itself, because the buck stops with the government. And I'm not talking of just the federal government in Abuja. The state governments, they have a role, and their role, since the major Memorandum of Understanding was signed 20 years ago, and I'm talking of 2005, they have failed in their role to provide enabling policies and actually harmonize regulations and negotiate, favorable terms. So in that score, they too failed. Even out here, the diaspora, my colleagues, they have not actually followed through in terms of actually playing their role of helping in research and development R&D and helping to mobilize those businesses out, in Brazil that will help to actually ginger their government. But let's not go negative. I think it is important that when a doctor wants to treat, the doctor starts with a diagnosis. So what I have just done is essentially providing a diagnosis of why those, MOUs of the past have failed. Going forward, there are some rays of hope coming out because it is understood that even before the president went to Brazil, some implementation plans were, already in the works, and the Nigerian diaspora, for instance, are already, doing their bits, organizing and, mobilizing them, doctorate research students and all of that. And here we are, Lekon, having a conversation on this. And your first question is, why did we fail in the past? So that is the way to go. And I want to believe that if we all, continue in this trajectory of doing our bit, and all of society approach rather than an approach that simply focuses on government and government alone, the narrative will be different this time around. That is my...
All right, Collins, you talked about the failure of the media to interrogate. I mean, what about Nigeria's political cycle where new governments often abandon the agreements of their predecessors? Does that not also play a role in the failure of MOUs coming into play?
that is the major failure. You know, when there is absence, very, very conspicuous absence of political will to do what they ought to do. That is where the failure starts from. But you see, the point I'm trying to make, Leko, is the fact that when that failure occurs, when the political will is conspicuously lacking, it is up to the media, the foreign state, to actually raise it and take every opportunity that is presented to you, because every day you have these, political operatives, either the elected officials or their advisors, you have them on your studio. So ask them questions about why they are not doing what they ought to do to actually heighten that political will. So, but yes, I agree with you that the failure starts with them, and maybe this is the time has now come for, Nigerians to begin to realize that we are lying belly down because those elected or selected, as the case may be, to represent us are not doing what they ought to be doing.
All right, we've done a bit of diagnosis of where the issues are. Let's look at the potential for the positive sides now. We're looking at a partnership that can spin off about $10 billion. For you, what actually do these two countries stand to benefit from each other? Probably which sectors do you think hold the strongest opportunities for boosting trade?
Quite a lot of potentials looking out there, Lekon. Let's begin with the memoranda of understanding signed, in some cases, bilateral agreements. In the case of, BASA, which is the bilateral air service agreement, was signed, paving the way for direct flights between Lagos and Sao Paulo in Brazil. This is expected to unlock mobility for businesses, diaspora, and cultural exchange. You probably know this, Lekon, that there is a very huge chunk of, Yoruba descendants that are, in Brazil. They, through the transatlantic slave trade, rather, they were, shipped over to that part of the world between the 16th and the 19th century. They have not lost their culture. They continue to exhibit it, and most of them, in fact, I would say practically all of them, are hungry to, make a return tour back to Nigeria. Some remnants of it are already happening. This direct flight will boost it. Now, take another MoU that was signed, which is expanded trade commitments. Bilateral trade, which had plunged to 1.6 billion, I believe, in 2013, recovered to 2.1 billion in 2024, just last year, with Nigeria exporting fertilizers, petrochemicals, and importing Brazilian sugar and agro products. This is another area that is indeed, receiving a boost with, the trip of President Bola Tinubu. And then oil and gas. Petrobras is now poised to return to Nigeria after a 5-year hiatus. They were absent. They were in Nigeria, and then they left, some 5 years ago, signaling potential deep water oil exploration investments. So what I mean is essentially, in everyday language, is that Brazil is now set to bring in capital, but also, some human capital, not just financial capital, but the technology in deep water exploration. This is something good for Nigeria. And last but not least is the momentum for agriculture and technology cooperation that has been, developed as a consequence of an MoU signed in that regard, especially around mechanized farming and, knowledge transfer in that regard. So, listen, the potential is just huge, but if it is not driven purposefully, if it is not followed through, it will end up like other MoUs that are, collecting dust somewhere in a closet in Abuja and in Sao Paulo without, follow-up. And that is where the focus ought to be this time around.
All right, before we go, you talked about agriculture a while ago, and I'd like to find out, do you think that Nigeria has gotten to that point? We know that Brazil is a top shot when it comes to agriculture, biofuels, and the likes. But then Nigeria has issues with improving its food security capacity and indices, and also in energy diversification. It's been a bit of a challenge. Do you think that Nigeria is at that point where it can leverage this opportunity with Brazil, or it's just going to be a skewed narrative at the end of the day?
We have, since 20 years ago, when the first, signs of developing collaboration between Nigeria and Brazil surfaced, Nigeria has made quite some, important developments in the area of agriculture, particularly in mechanized farming. Now, the MoU that was signed is set to boost that mechanized farming. Don't forget, Leko, that Nigeria exports fertilizer to Brazil, which is used in the production of, sugar that is then, sent back to Nigeria. I believe that part of the technology that, Brazil will be getting into Nigeria is sugar, farming, technology, but more importantly, because, we produce sugarcane, but the manufacturing, the technology, to actually produce sugar, that is something that will be coming to them. But yes, indeed, Nigeria has its own bits to play. So it is very, very important at this stage that Nigeria would have to build a facility around the Murtala Mohammed International Airport, for perishable goods. Good 18, Air Peace will now be flying direct from Lagos to Sao Paulo, meaning that in 7 hours, as opposed to nearly 24 hours, that is currently the case, goods can get to, to Sao Paulo, Brazil. So which means that with such facility built by government and with incentives made available to the private sector, some of these, pitfalls of the past will actually be a thing of the past, and trade, particularly in agriculture, will be enhanced.
And we hope that the ordinary Nigerian will also feel the impact of these sort of agreements, bilateral ties with these top countries around the world. Thank you so much, Collins Nweke, Global Affairs Analyst, for sharing your thoughts with us on the show.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me, and have a good weekend.
And you too.